What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another edition of SSPN Live. I'm Jude, that's Ethan. And today, we're going to be talking some Spurs small forwards. A lot of these guys are going to be switching around, but these guys are mainly probably going to be playing the three for the most part, we think, Ethan.
We think is the key part of that phrase, Jude.
Couldn't have said it better myself. But with that being said, me and you were kind of texting about this earlier this week because we weren't sure exactly how we wanted to format it. Because, like we said, some of these guys will be switching, but this is our best estimation. And so, in a lot of in the other two episodes that we've done so far in the position previews, we've been doing three players. Today, we will be doing four, as Ethan has held up right there. So we'll be talking about Harrison Barnes, which I think will be very interesting. That one's going to be super fun. Obviously, Keldon Johnson. Watching his role this season, I think is going to be interesting for a multitude of things that we'll get into. And then, these are two guys on the roster, especially the last one that I'll mention, but really both of these guys are kind of forgotten about in a sense. Not saying they're going to get a ton of big time minutes or anything, but Julian Champagnie is also still on the team, and we'll see, maybe he'll play some four, or maybe we'll play him at the three next to Keldon. And then Sidy Cissoko, that I think probably is the name on the actual roster that, and a little bit of that has to do with his summer league performance as well. But still, that's probably the name that kind of slipped my mind the most when I was looking at this week going into it. So I guess with that being said, Ethan, kind of what are your thoughts on the position overall before we get into the individual players?
I think Harrison Barnes being added to this makes it a much better positional group. I think had he not been traded for, it would have been one of our weakest positions because Julian likely would have been starting. And, we'll get into his positives and negatives, but that's obviously not a great starting small forward spot. But with the veteran presence of Harrison, it kind of changes everything around, and we're still able to let CD kind of grow in the background and not necessarily have to get thrown into the fire.
Yeah, and especially with having Julian there, he's somebody who has played NBA minutes, regardless
Sure.
of what you think of Julian Champagnie. He is somebody who, again, has had competent, real NBA minutes, where CD, that is not necessarily the case. And I think probably, especially with the Harrison Barnes trade, he's somebody who will spend a lot of time in Austin once again this season. But we forget he's a second round pick in his second year. He was just in the same draft as Victor Wembanyama, so that's kind of a very big difference there in the trajectory of their careers.
Right, and ultimately, whoever was going to be drafted next to Victor, they weren't going to live up to the same level of hype or expectation as Wembanyama, obviously.
Absolutely, Ethan. Well, is there any Spurs news that caught your eye this week? I didn't see anything. Before we get into the individual players?
No, sir. Nothing comes to mind. I did see Keldon Johnson shouted out my hometown. Bernie,
Ooh.
our Little League baseball team, was in the finals in the Little League World Series. So that's a Texas connection. Thank you, Keldon. I think he lives close to Bernie. I don't know if he lives in the city, but felt cool to hear Keldon Johnson say my hometown's name.
Absolutely. And hey, I'm glad you brought up Keldon, because here's something that we talked about a couple episodes ago. It came out that he will be wearing number 3.
I did see that. Yeah, that's crazy. That is really crazy. And I mean, obviously, there's nothing we can do or say about that to change that. And I would think Chris Paul doesn't necessarily care, because if he cared, there probably would have been a fight over who gets
Right.
number 3. But now it's just like, what's CP what? CP3. What else rhymes with P?
We're going to have to find out. I've seen a lot of people saying CP4. That's been out there.
CP, we will see.
Ooh, there you go, Ethan. That's better than I could have put it. But that was some, I guess, significant Spurs news. Surprising a little bit, but it does make sense considering Chris Paul's probably only going to be here for 1 year.
Right. Fair.
But let's jump into it, man. Harrison Barnes, let's start with him. I believe you and I both think that he is probably going to be in the starting lineup going into the season. I think just like we saw last year, what we start with may not be what we finish with. But to start the year, I think whenever we went over our rotations, just kind of previewing the rotations, I think that was sometime last month or after free agency when we had the roster like finally settled. We had Chris Paul, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sohan, and Victor Wembanyama. So, with that lineup in mind, I'll just dish it to you, man. What are your thoughts on how Harrison Barnes fits into the team? And then also his versatility if maybe we play him at the four off the bench.
I think his fit is seamless. The same positive that we had with Julian Champagnie starting is the same positive with him starting in the sense that he is a 3-and-D guy, right? But he's going to do every other little thing correctly where Julian might not have. I think he's an above average level defender at the NBA level. He's obviously 6'8", long, lengthy, very versatile defender, can basically switch 1 through 4 at this point in his career. He can play small ball 4, but he's also like a very solid 3, came into the league as a 3. And what's interesting to me, Jude, is he was the most efficient scorer of our small forwards last season at 47% from the field, 39% from 3. That beats Keldon. That also beats Julian from both field goal percentage and 3-point percentage. And I understand that, yes, he played with some better players and Sabonis and Fox last year, and he was not the focal point of the offense. But I'm excited to see if he can kind of get back to what he used to be early in Sacramento, as well as with the Mavericks, who he shared a short stint with, and then obviously as a young player in the Warriors, where he was always either the second or third scoring option and showed you a lot of versatility as a scorer, as an off the ball scorer, as a post up threat. And we really didn't see that last year in Sacramento. He was really relegated to just shooting threes and maybe the occasional bucket if things got really bad for them. So on this team, as a veteran presence with that mindset as a connective piece, maybe he can kind of unlock some of that old school mentality that he used to play with back when it was required from him.
I think that's a great point, and that's exactly where I was going to go with it, right? You're going to have Devin and you're going to have Chris Paul with the ball in their hands a lot. I know we
Yep,
talked about how Devin's going to have, a lot more off-ball opportunities in our last episode, but still, Devin Vassell will definitely have the ball in his hands more than a Harrison Barnes per se.
for
And then
sure.
on top of that, you've got Victor, who is
Yep.
going to have his hands or the ball in his hands a lot. And it just kind of reminds me of that role on the Warriors. Like he is going to be someone who's spacing the floor, playing off the ball, placing himself in a good place. And also, he's not somebody that the defense can sag off of either.
Correct.
So I think that's going to have a lot of other impacts in the lineup. But when it comes to just, I guess, his offensive fit, really, I just see him as mainly a shooter. I'm
hmm
sure we'll see some drives and some dunks from time to time. And then defensively, we just need him to be connective, be a good communicator. He's really just, I don't want to, go too over the top here, but he really just feels like the perfect role player, at that 3 position for this young group.
He's exactly what we were talking about early in the offseason. We were discussing Spurs needs, and it was like maybe we can find someone who's kind of on the downside of his career that's okay with a small role that can fill that need. This is exactly what Harrison Barnes is. And the difference between him and Julian is not marginal. It is significant. Like let to say it lightly, no disrespect
Right.
to Julian, but it is a drastic change.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the other thing that I was thinking about with Harrison is not just the stuff that he's going to be able to teach some of the other guys on the team that we talked about. But dang it, I'm blanking. There was something else I was going to say, and I was kind of just throwing that around there to see if it would come to me, but
Mm,
it didn't, unfortunately.
that's okay. I only have one last thing to say about Harrison Barnes, and kind of the
I
drawback.
remembered it, but go ahead.
So I was gonna say the drawback with Julian again was that he never really put the ball on the floor. Defenses could play him one way and one way only, and he's only going to shoot threes. Harrison Barnes, you have to worry about him as a basketball player. He can put the ball on the floor, he can make the right play, and he can score on his own if that's really what it comes down to.
Absolutely. And if we leave him open, you
He's gonna
mentioned
lace it.
the 3-point percentage and all that stuff. Really with him again, the connectiveness on both sides of the ball as well as the experience is just going to be invaluable for this team. Then the other thing that I was going to say that I just forgot a little bit earlier was as much as, he is technically on the later side of his career. I just checked his birth date and that's May 30th of next season. So he's going to be 32 most likely, unless the Spurs go on some improbable playoff run. He's going to be 32 years old for the majority of the season,
Mm.
which is still, what a lot of people would consider like the prime of players, as much as it is maybe the last year or so.
Right. No, he's not old. I hope
Right.
that wasn't what I said, but he is a veteran presence. But he still has a couple of years left of being a solid contributor.
Yeah, because I was curious. I was like, "Is he 34 or is I thought he
No.
was closer to 31, 32, and that's what it is. So, not somebody who is just, not Chris Paul, I'll put it that way.
No.
And not to diminish what Chris Paul is gonna bring to this team, but big difference between 39 and 32.
For sure.
And let's see, we got a comment here. Cowboy Tanaka, who is watching late from the EU. We appreciate you
Wow.
being in here, my guy. What's the percentage chance that Barnes will play the best season of his career?
Ooh. I would say 3% chance. That's being generous, only because if we're just going to base it off stats, it's going to be his first year in Dallas where he averaged 19 points a game,
Right.
5 boards. I think he was like the number one contributor outside of Dirk. That might have been, was that Luka's rookie year? I think that was the year before Luka got there.
Yes,
But
I think you're right.
anyway, and then obviously you have a dynastic run with Golden State where he won a ring and then had the greatest record of all time. So I'm going to say 3%, and that's being very generous.
Yeah, I think the Mavs point that you just made there, it's hard to top that, as well
Yeah.
as just as much as, we like the supporting cast around Harrison Barnes, and we were just kind of talking about how, those guys can maybe get him open looks, by the attention that they draw, especially with CP3, Devin, and Victor, and even Jeremy to an extent. We'll probably
Yeah.
see him with the ball in his hands from time to time, just like we saw last year, even when he wasn't the point guard anymore. Oh man, I don't. I'll go
You
with
lost it
you.
again? Oh, yeah.
No. I'll go with 3% on this one. But what I will say is, maybe this will be up there whenever it comes to it, his. I don't know. I was gonna say him as a
His
role player.
legacy?
Him as a role player.
Mhm.
Him as maybe. Here's a better way to put it. He'll do the little things that don't show up on the stat sheet. This might be the year where those things are highlighted more than maybe years past.
You know what I'll say? If we can get into the playoffs somehow and he's a really solid contributor, this could be like what Steven Jackson's We Believe Warriors was for his career. Because Steven Jackson was a better scorer in Charlotte, but they sucked. And then he won a championship with the 2003 Spurs, which is like him with the Warriors. But then the We Believe Warriors, the second go around, or no, with the Spurs, sorry. The We Believe Warriors, he wasn't a great team. I think he's the eighth seed, but they beat that first seed Jazz or
Mhm.
first seeded Mavericks. God, I'm all over the place. They beat the first seeded Mavericks. If he can do something like that, it speaks well to his legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of ties into some of the other things whenever it comes to Harrison, the things that he'll bring to the team off the court that I mentioned earlier. Chris Rodriguez says, who benefits the most from the added veterans besides Wemby?
Mm. Man, that's a great question. I'm gonna go Coach Popovich.
His blood pressure will be lower.
His blood pressure will be lower. There's some players that he can fully trust because of their age and experience. Like he's going to benefit more than anybody. Player wise, probably Devin because he's going to be allowed to play his style better. But I think Pop, on a serious note, actually is going to benefit more than anyone.
As much as that's really funny, what I was just thinking about? I was
Mm.
thinking about, okay, well, I have to drink less wine. And then I was like, no, he's still going to drink the same amount of wine because now he's
Yeah,
going to be drinking it with these guys at dinner. And he'll have
adults.
people, yeah, he'll have people that aren't like around our age to talk to at dinner other than the assistant coaches.
Yeah, that's got to be big for him. Actually, yeah, he could finally he could finally have a conversation with his players. They
Oh,
traded
my
away
goodness.
Doug. He's been missing. He's been missing his vets.
For sure. He hasn't had anybody to talk to since then. Oh my goodness. Man, there was something else I was thinking about with Harrison, but again, I think it's slipping my mind a little bit. Oh, this is to answer Chris's question. It kind of ties into the next person we're going to talk about. As much as I agree with Devin, I think specifically Keldon Johnson is
Mm,
going to learn a ton from Harrison Barnes. I
mm.
mean, because we've seen flashes of Keldon, shooting well throughout his career, being a spot up shooter. And then we've also seen, that kind of fall off a little bit. Really, we haven't seen that flamethrower like, start to the season that we saw in 2022. As much as, his percentages aren't like sub 30% or anything, we haven't really seen that form that we thought he could be, since then. Um, and some of that does just have to do with shooting, and maybe his jump shot never gets back to that level. But I think spacing, positioning himself on the floor. A lot of times when Keldon's off the ball, other than just cut running towards the rim, and that's not even with the ball in his hands, like other than cutting, just trying to crash the boards, get a second chance opportunity. Harrison can help him a lot when it comes to positioning himself in the offense and being able to do things without the ball movement wise that will benefit whatever set we're running, or even if it's a free flowing pick and roll with Devin and Wemby or CP3 and Wemby. Just how he positions himself and plays off the ball offensively, I think Harrison is going to be able to teach Keldon a lot. Now, we'll have to see what the results end up being, but I think he's going to be able to teach him, bare minimum, a lot of different things there.
No, that's for sure. I think the same can be said for Chris Paul and Keldon Johnson as well, because he's really never played with a veteran point guard like that. Like DeJounte was a good point guard, but he wasn't a veteran. He wasn't necessarily a floor general in the same capacity. So I think CP3 being able to teach Keldon, where he's supposed to be on the same side of that, but just from a point guard perspective, will go a long way. Um, because like I feel like physically he's very aggressive, but also just like play style wise, I feel like he enforces himself where he shouldn't if things aren't going well for the team. Chris Paul won't necessarily allow that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point there. And Cowboy Tanaka says, how about Jeremy finally being able
Yeah.
to play a normal role? I don't want to get into that yet, Cowboy, because next week we will be talking about the power forwards and going through our position breakdown there. And because we're doing 4 guys today, we kind of got to save as much content for
Right.
next week as we can with just 2 guys, that we'll be talking about next week. But Chris responds and he says, I think Castle, they are both going to see that dog in him. I mean,
Fair point.
he's going to be the point guard of the future next year, and he's kind of just going to be mentored by Chris Paul this whole season. So I can't argue with that at all. That's probably that probably is the most on the roster. But all of these guys, because of their age and position wise and all that type of stuff, while Castle is kind of the heir apparent when it comes to point guard with CP3, I would say that Keldon is kind of the heir apparent when it comes to the small forward position with Harrison Barnes, but Julian as well, CD too.
Well said. Nothing to add.
But with that being said, let's get into Keldon Johnson, Ethan. Um, So I guess I'll start with this. As much as we mentioned that starting lineup, do you think there's a world where we start Keldon and Harrison comes off the bench at the 4?
I think it's possible. I really do, because I mean, Keldon's a solid scorer off the bench. We saw that last year, but at the same time, Harrison Barnes, I think, has a better isolation bag. And if you're just looking for someone to be the primary scorer off the bench, it does make sense that Harrison is probably a more suitable candidate for that. However, I also think his floor spacing is just invaluable next to Wemby and next to Devin and CP3, having a veteran, player to play next to. So that's why I think Harrison will ultimately get the nod.
Yeah, and I completely agree. It goes back to what we were talking about last week when we talked about Stefan and Keldon coming off the bench
Yeah.
and the physicality and the energy that they would bring in that scenario, as well as the benefits of Keldon coming off the bench last season as well. And the other thing we forget about Harrison, he's got 2 years on his deal.
Yeah.
So we could see another year of him as well. And I think, I would definitely be down for that. That's for sure.
Either way, I won't be upset. But I think, like you said, the Keldon Stefan pairing off the bench would do wonders for the energy, especially if we get off to a bad start.
That is a great point there, my guy. But talking about Keldon, overall strengths and weaknesses, what are your thoughts on now year 6 for Keldon Johnson?
It's going to be an interesting year. I feel like at this point in his career, the clock is kind of ticking on his impactfulness, unfortunately, and that's saying something because he's only 24 years old. But I think he's the most tenured Spur on the roster right now. So in terms of what the fans as well as what the front office expect from him, is probably at the highest point in his career, especially as we look at being competitive. last year he was more efficient than 2 years prior, both as just a scorer and as a three-point shooter, so that's great, but he did have a dip off as far as volume scoring. I'm
Right.
gonna give him a slight pass because his role was changing. He was also getting used to playing with Wemby. There's a lot of differences last year, a lot of nuances to that. So I don't want to just like say he played bad. He scored 16 points a game as opposed to 22. We'll probably never see that 22 mark again. That was an off thing because he was the only player we had scoring the ball. So this year, I just hope for just more consistency, a more consistent role for him, scoring the ball, maybe slightly better efficiency. And just like you said earlier in the offseason, be a connective piece. I think defensively, he's always going to be kind of who he is. It'll probably get a little bit better with time just because our chemistry will get better. Our communication will get better. We have veteran presences on the team that won't allow people to take plays off necessarily. But offensively, just be a connective piece, make the right play, and don't always, push yourself past helping the team. You know what I mean? And just trying
Yeah.
to will us to a win because it's always not helpful.
Right. And sometimes when he did that, he kept us in games and
For
helped us
sure.
get wins. But
There's also the messy
sometimes,
moments.
right, there's the flip side of that where we probably could have gotten a better shot on a possession. And when me and Keldon, or excuse me, when me and Ethan are criticizing Keldon, whenever it comes to those situations, we're not criticizing like Keldon's want to or his
No.
motivation or like what he's trying to do in that situation. You've just got to be, a little bit more aware of the circumstances instead of just trying to force, up a shot when we could use all the shot clock, orchestrate a set, and, get a better shot for the team.
hmm I think confidence is going to be a big thing for him too. I think he may have taken a shot confidence wise last year. I think he needs to kind of rekindle that fire, that flame underneath him.
Yeah. And I think that playing next to Stefan, like
For
with that
sure.
energy, like I think I can see both of them. There's already a bunch of pictures of Stefan at UConn, kind of flexing and yelling. If both of them can be physical presences, make plays, imagine a Stefan to Keldon lob and then both of
hmm
them screaming afterwards. That is some good juice and energy that, can kind of rekindle, like you said, the Keldon Johnson that kind of a bunch of Spurs fans fell in love with,
Yeah.
when he was just out there hustling with DeMar and DeJounte in the bubble.
I mean, having Harrison and Chris Paul and Stefan and a seasoned Victor, I think this will kind of allow him to get back to that a little bit, where he won't necessarily have to be the big time scorer. He can score just in the flow of the offense. Like we don't necessarily have to write up plays for him. And I think that's going to help his confidence. It's going to help his efficiency. And he's going to visually, just eye test, look more impactful.
Yeah, and Connor McLeod is saying that Keldon has slimmed down this offseason. He said it's like he's lost 12 pounds. But I
Nice.
also agree with some of the other comments are saying, like, and it's kind of what you opened up with here, Ethan. How do I put this? I don't want to say he's on trial. That's a bad way to put it. But like, this is kind of okay. If we see the same thing that we saw last year with Keldon, I think then me and you will be like, all right, I think we kind of, at this point, you kind of got to lower the ceiling a little bit. But, surrounded by CP3 and Harrison Barnes, again, as well as Stefan, as we mentioned, like there's still going to be times where he's on the floor with Chris Paul. Maybe there's an injury and we got to play Keldon and Harrison Barnes together at both of the forward positions. With this new team infrastructure surrounding him, if you will, if we still continue to see those same struggles, then it's like, okay, even with a better supporting cast, those are still the issues. And then we'll, again, kind of have a little bit more of a concrete thought on that.
For sure. Reassess. Let us reassess at All-Star break. Then we'll have a better, more definitive answer for you guys.
Right. And the last thing that I'll say just on Keldon, half court offense.
Yeah.
That's the main thing that ties into all the stuff that I talked about with Harrison. And then defensively, it just comes down to, on-ball defense as well. Oh, I was going to say on-ball defense. Off-ball defense really is actually probably the bigger
His biggest
thing.
problem.
Yeah, for him. But still, there were some on-ball times where he can get, blown past at times as well. But I think, like you said, the connectiveness. That's the thing when I look at him on defense, being aware of everything going on. That ties into the communication thing that we've continued to harp on, that we hope Harrison Barnes and Chris Paul bring. But communication isn't going to fix everything, but still, those guys can teach them a lot. And that's why, there's a little bit of hope for me that, he can really, I'm not saying like a giant jump, but become, a solid defender and use his physical tools that,
Mm.
he's blessed with. But again, we have a lot of sample size of, of what we've seen so far. But
Mhm.
when you go back to the beginning, he had DeMar DeRozan, he had DeJounte Murray, but I still wouldn't say that, that was exactly, we were playing Keldon at the 4 then as well. So,
Yeah.
he wasn't having to play on the perimeter as much. So it wasn't, and it's not like DeMar is going to, be the number one teacher for defense. And that's not to hate on DeMar at all, or to say that he's a bad defender in any means. But I think that these guys, Chris Paul, and specifically a Harrison Barnes, with what Keldon's role has kind of evolved into, I think they'll be able to, the teaching that they will give him will be more applicable to who he is as a player, if that makes sense.
For sure it does.
Gregory Castillo says, wishing Keldon the best in Cleveland when Darius Garland comes to SA.
I don't know if that's going to happen, my friend.
I was going to say we had those rumors all summer, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. We'll see with some of the trades moving forward.
Right.
It's all wide open under Victor Wembanyama. But any final thoughts on KJ?
No, sir.
Well, that brings us in to the rest of these small forwards that we probably won't see as much of, but they are still on a full contract. So we got to talk about them, Ethan. And inevitably there will be rest days, maybe for Harrison, or just, injuries that pop up here and there. And Julian Champagnie at the forward position, whether that's the 3 or the 4, will probably be the guy who slides into that role if there's like I said, if there's a rest day for Harrison or somebody gets hurt.
Yeah, Julian, we've said it once, we've said it 1,000 times. As a third stringer, I really, really like him. He's 6'7", he's long, he does play defense. He's not the greatest defender in the world, but he is physical and he's capable, so that's great. And he also hustles. Offensively, his skill set is shoot the ball when he's wide open, Jude. And he's got surprising athleticism, but he never really puts the ball on the floor to dunk, so that's not exactly his strength either, unless he's in transition. So what were we gonna say?
I was going to say one thing I was going to say, he actually had some pretty
He had some
nice
dunks.
dunks, but they're not often.
No, they're not
But
often.
I was going to say that as kind of like I hope we can see another Julian poster. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
we'll probably get 1 or 2, but he's not crossing anybody
For
up
sure.
and yamming it.
Absolutely.
He's getting wide open backdoor cuts. So at 7 points a game last year, 37% from 3. He's a solid piece to kind of fill in the gaps. And I think honestly he'll play better in that role where teams aren't necessarily looking for him. He can kind of take people by surprise and just take advantage of the spot minutes that he'll get.
I couldn't have put it better myself. And I feel like when we first brought him in, that's kind of a little bit of what we saw. And then when we're starting him for an entire season,
You see more of the holes, right?
Right. And the other thing we forget about Julian, he's like 22, 23 as well.
23, yeah.
So, I'm not trying to say that we're going to see a massive jump or anything from Champagnie this season, but I also do think that, as young as he is, he's still improving and growing as a player. So if we can see, just a little bit more, I think really the reps that he's gotten, as well as again, Harrison Barnes and CP3 coming in, I think they're really going to help teach him the little things, as well as just having more NBA seasons under his belt, knowing how to play off the ball next to a Victor Wembanyama, and another season getting coached by Greg Popovich. If we can just see a little incremental improvement from Julian, less mistakes, being more aware, like I said, kind of being that connective piece, not to say the same thing with all of these guys, but it's so important, especially when it comes to our defense, because we were very disconnected on defense. And then offensively, as we've talked about, we really weren't even running, sets that often. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So with Chris Paul, that's going to change things a lot on the offensive side of the ball, as well as Stephon Castle too. But the main thing with Julian is kind of like you said, just be that 3-and-D sniper. And if you have a lane to go to the rack, go yam it down like you did a couple times. But yeah, just being that, filling in the edges, if you will.
I like that. Marginal. He's marginal.
But again, like our guy Drew King said in the comments, I'm very glad we kept Julian, because like you said, as a third stringer, especially after having a season of reps, in a starting lineup, very valuable, as well as his positional versatility as well, because he's a guy who could also play the 2 if we need him to, if there's an injury.
And the
there.
4.
Well, that's what I was saying, right? Because earlier we were talking about him at the 3 and the 4.
Yeah,
and then
the 2.
So he's just, again, a very valuable third stringer to have, because inevitably there will be injuries in the NBA.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And the contract he's on. Gotta love that.
Oh, love a good long-term contract with no money in it.
Very high value for what Julian Champagnie brings to the table. And that brings us into probably, I guess I don't want to say most intriguing player on the team, because that's not necessarily the case, but most interesting, I know I called Malachi like the curious case of Malachi Branham.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say that for Sidy, because he's just going into year 2. And also the other thing about Summer League, I don't want to make a complete excuse, because there were some things he played, even after Stephon did. And there were some things that, didn't develop against other Summer League teams and that we would have liked to see. But he was kind of coming off of an injury going into Summer League. I do want to just say that, at least, because that is, there. But yeah, I know, like I said at the beginning of this episode, he's probably going to be in Austin for most of the season. But what are your thoughts on Sidy Cissoko being a full roster player on this team?
Remember when in 2K, my league way back in the day, you would sign someone and it would say you have to assign them a role,
Yeah.
like starter. At the very bottom, it was prospect. That's Sidy Cissoko. I think we cannot expect any contribution from him in the actual regular season this year, unless we are just awful again. And at the very end of the year, we give him some spot minutes. But you're right. I want to say that he had the injury in Summer League, so that is a kind of an excuse, and it is a valid excuse for why he didn't play as well as we would have liked to have seen him play. But his only positive thus far has been as a connective piece on offense, which is hilarious. That's the negative for everybody else.
Right.
But offensively, he is connective piece. He can't really shoot. He's not a great finisher yet. And he can't dribble great. He's a better dribbler than Jeremy was early in his career, but he can't dribble great yet. And he's really only going to score in transition off of dunks.
Right.
And to his credit, he does dunk them. He does not lay them up softly. He yams them down, which is great. I love to have that from a very athletic wing, kind of combo playmaker wing build. He's Boris Diaw, but with more muscle and athleticism. Defensively, I like what I saw. He's a physical defender. He's a capable defender. He's a hustler. He puts in the effort where other guys do not. And he is a connective piece again, which is great. It's just all the other skill sets that he has yet to develop, at least by our eye test. But again, he was injured, so it's kind of hard to fully judge him. But I'm sure Jude's looking forward to a full G League season from him, where he will be all over those box scores. I just know you will.
We're going to see so many dunk highlights.
Man.
And don't get me started on that starting lineup of Jamari Bouye, David Duke Jr., Sidy Cissoko, Harrison Ingram, and I don't know, maybe
Mensah?
Charles. Maybe I was going to say maybe Mensah. I know he got cut from the training camp roster. I could see him on the team. And our boy Charles Bediako. We cannot forget he is still an Austin Spur. At least he was at the end of last season. I'm pretty sure he'll be back. And oh my gosh, Serge Jabari Rice off the bench is the 6th man.
We can't beat it. Cannot beat it. That's a championship G League team if I've ever heard of one.
We need it. Oh my gosh. When they play, I got to figure out what the Hawks, I got to figure out what their G League team is. I know the Hornets are the Greensboro Swarm. Let me see. I got to figure this out. Because if we get Dom Beasy, the College Park Skyhawks, okay? If we get Dom Beasy versus that team, I may just cry.
That would be crazy. You know what? I just realized we haven't seen in a while. Sorry, go ahead and do your Sidy Cissoko stuff.
No, you're good. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Go ahead.
When you said Bediako, I was like, what happened to Kemp Birch? And I just had to like Wikipedia him real quick. And he just never played for us. He went overseas.
Yeah. No, and hey, shout out Kem Birch playing for
Yeah.
Team Canada in the Olympics, baby.
Shout out him. I didn't realize that he actually never wore a Spurs uniform.
Am I tripping here?
Hmm.
Spurs made a huge trade for a 7-foot stretch 5 from the Celtics, so he is going to ball. Maybe that is a G League guy because he says G League champs. I'm ignorant there, Gregory, but you probably know. I feel like you know what you're talking about.
Put it in the comments, my friend.
Because they can make trades in the G League. So
We'll see. He'll put something in there.
Carsick Collins says Kem Birch is a Spurs legend.
Damn right he is.
Just like Chandler Hutchinson, but not as much of a legend as my boy Don Barlow.
Mm.
Robert Ball asks, did another team pick up Don Barlow? Yes, the Atlanta Hawks picked him up on a 2-way. But look, when Charles Bassey, no, I don't want to say that. If somebody goes down for the season, we know who we're calling. That's all I got to say.
Damn right, baby. Damn right we are. We'll give you all your first back for Don Barlow.
We're getting 2025 first for Don Barlow. Oh my gosh. Okay, seriously, I wish the best for Dom, and I will be paying attention to him for sure. And in 2027, when him and Drew Eubanks come back, it's going to be a great day for us, Ethan.
Shout out my guy Drew.
Okay, but back to Sidy Cissoko. To talk about just, I mean, I'll wrap this up pretty quickly. Offensively, really, the entire arsenal still needs some work. Not to say there's not potential there in areas you mentioned, like there's potential as a handler, as a wing combo guard. You know, obviously driving to the rack, he is tenacious. He is a physical presence. He's imposing. He can dunk. But we need to clean up finishing at the rim, you know, with layups, stuff like that. There's really not too much of an in-between game that we've seen. And unfortunately, the shooting did not look the way that we would like in Summer League. I'll just put it that way. And defensively, like you said, I really don't have too much to criticize him there. Here's the one thing I'll say, and we still unfortunately saw it in Summer League and really throughout the G League season last year, fouls.
Oh yeah.
We just if he can, like, even if he still fouls, like, I'm not mad at that, but we can't be fouling out, you know what I mean, or getting close to it every game, because then if you're fouling out like that, it's taking you off the floor, which then it's like that's your main strength, you know, is defense. But even fouling aside, really, like he is, you know, an aware defender. His physical presence, you know, makes him a solid on-ball defender. He's had some really nice highlight blocks. Defense is definitely SidyCissoko's strength.
Agreed. I agree with Drew King as well. I wish he could at least make free throws, Drew.
That's all we're asking, because he can get fouled driving to the rack.
Correct. And dunking it over anybody.
Exactly. We want those and ones too.
CD is deadly from 0 feet.
But once you get out from 1 foot away from the rim or further, he looks like a baby gazelle learning to play basketball for the first time. You know, as much as I use the baby gazelle reference for Victor sometimes, just whenever it came to, you know, the balance and things like that, you know, in like the first month or two of the season, I like this reference here for CD as well, because he's someone who can put the ball on the floor. It's just not as clean as we'd like it to be at this point.
Correct.
Let's see what else Carsick Colin has to say. Maybe Boban is coming back. He's tired of filming John Wick movies and he wants to be a Spur again. I would gladly still bring Boban back, Ethan.
Dude, Boban has made a career just being like the greatest locker room guy ever. Like, I don't think he contributes ever to his teams, but he's just so great. Everyone loves him that he's getting millions of dollars.
He's still only 36, man. That's all I'm saying.
Just let him be a coach at this point.
Two 7'4" guys.
Actually, you know what? He can't be a coach, because I would hate to see his knees on that bench with no room. You know what I mean? Because he'd be on the second row.
How does Victor do it?
Well, Victor's in the front.
First,
he's like super
true.
Skinny too.
That's
and
true.
He's also like, he can move. Poor Boban can't move.
Shout out Boban, man. I was thinking about his commercial earlier today where he's the commentator and he's like,
So good. He's
bounces it,
bouncing it,
he
bouncing it.
bounce it, he bounce it. Love
He bounce
Boban.
again. Yeah, shout out him.
Elite commentary.
Elite indeed.
Any final thoughts on this small forward position group as a whole, my guy?
No, sir. I think it's way better than it was last year. I think Harrison Barnes is a underrated pickup for us. I think it'll really help in a lot of areas that we were having difficulty last year. And just be patient with Keldon and Sidy. Please. Let's be
Right.
nice.
I love the way you put that there. The way that you started this off, Ethan, I think is perfect because Harrison Barnes, if we didn't bring in Harrison Barnes, like you said, this would probably be one of the weaker positions, if not the weakest
Yeah.
on the team. And bringing him in not only helps us on the floor, but it helps us off the floor as well
Right.
whenever it comes to, just being a veteran presence and everything like that. But also the stuff that he's going to teach all the other three guys that we talked about. Not to repeat everything we said, but it really kind of all starts with and ends with Harrison Barnes when it comes to the small forward position in a multitude of ways.
For sure. Shout out Harrison.
For real. Number 40. We know his number.
Yes, we do.
We'll still have to wait and see. I was going to say what CP3's is, but I can't even call him that.
You know what? I might have to get some Harrison Barnes merch.
I
One
saw
of these days, it's going to be worth a lot of money.
I saw he had a website. So when I was looking up his age earlier, so maybe he's got some merch on there.
You know I'll be hitting that up later. You know I will.
Shout out Harrison. We are very excited to see him on the Spurs roster, as well as the rest of these guys in the roles that they fill in as well. Any final thoughts, my guy?
No, sir. No, sir.
That just about wraps it up then. We appreciate all you guys coming in and hanging out for another preseason position breakdown. We'll be back next week talking about Jeremy Sohan and Sandro Mamukelashvili. I think those will be definitely some interesting conversations, especially if Mamu does end up being in the rotation full time as a 4. But we'll get into all of that next week. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button below. And if you want to stay updated with the channel, see when all of our posts are out and all that stuff, you can click the notification bell, as well as follow us on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate you guys.